Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm one of your hosts, Katie Helper.
I'm the other host, Aaron Matte. Thanks so much for being here. Our website, as always, is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. This week, we have two interviews for you. It's a Useful Idiots doubleheader. We'll be speaking to Glenn Diesen. He is a professor and author. We'll be talking to him about the latest in the Ukraine proxy war, where a lot is happening very fast. The U.S. is pushing for a peace deal, but is not happy with both sides, especially with Volodymyr Zelensky. So we'll be talking to Glenn Diesen about that. And we'll be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. He recently was up for a position inside the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to be the deputy to Tulsi Gabbard. But you'll never guess who stood in the way. Well, it was the pro-Israel, pro-war neocon lobby who basically got his nomination spiked. And we'll talk to him about that and all the latest in the various conflicts that the people who oppose Daniel Davis want to make even worse. And that includes Ukraine, Iran, and of course, the genocide in Gaza.
And we even have a little bit of a discussion of China featuring friend of show, Barry Weiss. Speaking of how Daniel Davis had his job offer rescinded because of pro-Israel pressure, what's interesting is that the rag Jewish Insider helped that happen by publishing a hit piece about him, and they're going to be part of my Democrats Suck. So for Democrats Suck, we're going to go to Michigan, where Attorney General Dana Nessel continues to crack down on pro-Palestine speech and protest. So she, Dana Nessel, Democrat, Attorney General of Michigan, ordered the FBI, Michigan State Police, and local police to raid the homes of pro-Palestine activists and students at the University of Michigan on Wednesday. They arrested 6 activists. The officers and agents arrived in unmarked vehicles, and in one location refused to present their search warrant, which again was approved of by Nessel. And according to the Tahrir Coalition, a group of pro-Palestine activists who were the first to report on this, besides detaining them, electronic devices and personal belongings were also confiscated. So let's take a look at a video of one of these raids.
No search warrant was provided.
Show me your hands now. Hands up.
Let them go. Let them go. Let them go.
Go right to here. Talk to them.
I'm not requesting
Let them go.
They're alleging that this is about vandalism, but it's pretty clear that this is about pro-Palestine speech. And here's what's fascinating. Here's what makes this really interesting. So this past fall, and we talked about on this very show, but this past fall, Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib criticized Attorney General Dana Nessel for charging 11 pro-Palestine protesters at the University of Michigan. And Tlaib said, instead of getting justice, not one criminal charge in the Flint water crisis, you're going to spend time in trying to use the power of your office to silence people's First Amendment right. So how did Dana Nessel respond to this allegation? Well, she accused Tlaib of being anti-Semitic. And she tweeted, Rashida should not use my religion to imply I cannot perform my job fairly as Attorney General. It is anti-Semitic and wrong. Okay, yeah, sure. Except Rashida Tlaib did not do that.
This is when I came up with the song, I believe, based on the REM song. I said, that's me in the Attorney General's office using my religion.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah. Wilson,
Yeah.
write that down. We need that on our compilation CD. Again, she's definitely using her religion to pretend that this very valid criticism is anti-Semitic. And she provides no evidence of it. And, the Michigan ACLU also criticized Dana Nessel for her draconian response to student protesters. So I guess we have to add the ACLU to anti-Semitic organizations. In fact, I hope the ADL is aware of this so they can add that to their anti-Semitism incidents. So it's just coming full circle. We see this incredibly aggressive, draconian civil rights, civil liberties violating prosecution of people for pro-Palestine speech. When Rashida Tlaib mentioned this, Dana Nessel responded by calling her an anti-Semite, and she couldn't have made Tlaib's point any more clearly than she just did by ordering an FBI raid on people who were protesting for Palestinian rights.
Well, I sure feel safe that some college protesters in Michigan are having their home raided because they don't like genocide.
And I bet you, Aaron, we're going to follow this story. We're going to stick with this story, and let's see how quickly Dana Nessel uses the anti-Semitism excuse again.
With the help of another Dana Bash and
Exactly.
and Jake Tapper. I'm sure they'll be all over this. Okay, if Republicans suck, let's turn to the president, Donald Trump. So many candidates for his suckiness on behalf of Republicans. And let's hear what he has to say about a proposal that's been going around from even some Republicans, including reportedly J.D. Vance, because they're facing this issue where they've kind of tanked the economy and they want to spend $1 trillion on the Pentagon. So where are they going to get the money to pay for all this? Because it's not coming from tariffs, especially as Trump appears to be backing down on some of his tariffs. Well, there was some talk recently in Republican circles about a tax on millionaires. And really what that means is basically not continuing with Trump's tax cut from 2017. But Trump has put an end to that silly talk of a millionaire tax.
And then secondly, would you support a millionaire tax?
I think it would be very disruptive because a lot of the millionaires would leave the country. You know, in the old days, they left states. They go from one state to the other. Now with transportation so quick and so easy, they leave countries. You'll lose a lot of money if you do that. That would, and other countries that have done it have lost a lot of people. They lose their wealthy people. That would be bad because the wealthy people pay the tax. Okay?
That's right. If you roll back that 2% tax cut for millionaires and you make them pay a little bit more, they'll be on the next flight to, I don't know, like where are they going to go? To the Cayman Islands? Like a place with zero. I mean, this is just so silly. And by the way, isn't he also kind of implicitly calling all these millionaires greedy and unpatriotic? The fact that they would just be out of here so quickly if you dared to raise their taxes even marginally. He's basically saying that they're not patriots, which actually, I think there's a lot of truth to that. But
it's one of those moments where he tells the truth unintentionally.
Yeah, but here is someone who points out something very important. Brendan Duke, he's a former official on the Biden-Harris National Economic Council. And this is what he said. A millionaire tax wasn't even on the table. People were discussing just paring back millionaires' tax cuts. But even that was unacceptable to Trump. He likes inappropriately long ties and tax cuts for millionaires. That's all there is to it. And yeah, that's the thing. It's not as if they were talking about this like sweeping new wealth tax where, you know, millionaires and billionaires were going to have to fork up a lot of their wealth. They were just saying, let's pare back some of these tax cuts we've already given them at a very small rate. And Trump is saying, nope, sorry, you have to find the money from somewhere else. And what does that mean ultimately? As we've talked about a lot on the show, that's going to mean programs like Medicaid, because we have to take away services from the vulnerable just to make sure that millionaires and billionaires keep their tax cuts.
But Aaron, it's okay, because even if they cut Medicaid, as we discussed in this week's Thursday Throwdown, they're giving states the chance to step up to the plate and make this a states' rights issue.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. For those who missed the Thursday Throwdown, what one member of Congress basically said, who's Republican, was that, okay, so what we're going to do is we're not cutting Medicaid. We're just going to give states essentially the responsibility to pay for it if they want it. So states can keep Medicaid if they want it, but we're not going to fund it. So basically, this is our way. Well, what he's basically saying is we are going to cut Medicaid. We're just going to blame states for it who won't be able to pay for it because they can't afford it because the federal government has stepped in with a lot of funding, especially under Obamacare. And that's the Republican approach to cutting Medicaid. Blame the states in the name of states' rights.
Isn't that weird? Let's take a look at how mainstream media is covering the life and death of Pope Francis. As James North points out at Mondo Weiss, mainstream obituaries are erasing Pope Francis's deep concern for Palestine. They don't mention the fact that his last public message on Easter Sunday, just hours before he died, had a call for a ceasefire and condemned the, quote, deplorable humanitarian situation there. They also don't mention that he personally called the Holy Family Church in Gaza basically every evening since Israel invaded that territory, including the Saturday night before Easter. And people should know that the Pope's support of Palestine preceded October 2023. Of course, you wouldn't know this if you read the New York Times and Washington Post obituaries about him. But Reverend Munther Isaac, a Palestinian Christian theologian and Lutheran pastor who we had on this very show, said, "I think no Palestinian will ever forget when Pope Francis in 2014 stopped his car, went down, stepped down, and prayed at the separation wall separating Jerusalem from Bethlehem, a moment that touched all of us and continued to speak to us for years." So isn't that weird that legacy media is erasing Pope Francis's pro-Palestinian speech?
Well, you know who's also erasing? The Israeli government erased its own tweet of condolence
Right.
on Pope Francis's death. This is what they originally said. "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May his memory be a blessing." And after people reminded Israel that Pope Francis was a critic of its mass murder campaign in Gaza, they deleted that tweet. I don't recall too many times, if ever, where someone, let alone a government, has deleted a condolence tweet. Certainly of
About
someone of that
Pope.
stature, too. And in this case, it's the Pope.
Kind of embarrassing. I guess they're in this awkward position. They could just ignore all the comments below their tweet because they got ratioed pretty hard for commemorating the death of someone who was such a critic of Israel. But I guess they could have just left the tweet up, but they can't do that because the record is so embarrassing. So they have to erase and delete. They have to erase and delete the truth, and they have to erase and delete tweets.
And Israel also has to continue to try to erase college students who continue to protest the genocide in Gaza. And for isn't that terrible, let's look at what's happening on campuses, starting with Yale University, where there was a new encampment established this week protesting a appearance on campus by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the extremist Israeli minister who openly promotes and incites mass murder against Palestinians. And as Yale students protested Itamar Ben-Gvir, this is what Yale did. And this comes from journalist Prem Thakur. After hundreds of Yale students protested in advance of Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir visiting campus, Yale has now stripped the school's Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, Yaleys for Palestine, of its status as an official student group. So these young students go out, protest a literal fascist who supports and takes part in mass murder, and they get their status revoked as a student group, which we've seen happen on other campuses as well. And this comes right after Itamar Ben-Gvir said this: "I had the honor and privilege of meeting with senior Republican Party officials at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. They expressed support for my very clear position on how to act in Gaza and that the food and aid depots should be bombed to create military and political pressure to bring our hostages home safely." So Itamar Ben-Gvir goes and brags about meeting with Republicans in Mar-a-Lago and getting them on board with his plan to bomb food and aid depots, which is a war crime. And now the students who protest him get their status revoked on campus. And just for a little window into who Ben-Gvir is, this is a short clip on his background.
As a teenager, Ben-Gvir opposed the Oslo peace accords with the Palestinians and infamously vandalized then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's car shortly before the latter's assassination in 1995. His views were so extreme that the Israeli army exempted him from compulsory military service in his youth. Ben-Gvir is a self-described disciple of extremist rabbi and former Knesset member Meir Kahane. Kahane's Kah party was banned and declared a terror group in the 1980s, both in Israel and the US, after one of its supporters, Baruch Goldstein, massacred 29 Palestinians praying at Al-Halil Mosque in Hebron in 1994. Ben-Gvir used to have a portrait of Goldstein hanging in his living room.
So that's who Itamar Ben-Gvir is, an outright fascist. And because he's protested, the students get their status revoked. And just like this is what's happening right now in the country. People who oppose this kind of extremism, they're getting censored and canceled. And the purveyors of this extremism, including someone who's openly talking about bombing food and aid depots, gets a warm welcome, including at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate.
I mean, it's such a terrible. It's such a terrible because the double standards are just so striking. The crimes that people are focusing on, quote unquote crimes, are not crimes. They are things like protest. The real crime, of course, is the crime of genocide. But the way that much of our media and our government is acting, the crimes that they are alleging are the crimes of protesting genocide. That's the crime. Despite the fact that these students were protesting a convicted terrorist and war criminal, some people would have you believe that the student protesters were targeting Jews. So here's Daily Wire's Cassia Kiva, who tweeted out this video and writes, Jewish students being screamed at for attending a lecture at Yale, as if they're being screamed at for being Jewish and not for attending a lecture delivered by Ben Gvir.
To the sea, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. Shame!
Here is a Yale student pretending that he's being blocked by protesters because he's Jewish.
We will not stop, we will not rest, this close. Divest. We will not stop, we will not rest, this close. Divest. We will not stop, we will not rest, this close. Divest.
So Netanel Crisp writes, Jewish students aren't allowed to walk through Yale's campus anymore. Now I want to turn to Caitlin Johnston, because she is a great explainer that lays out the logic of this guy's tweet. Zionist, move, I'm Jewish. Demonstrator, no, walk around me like a normal human being. Zionist, but I wish to be on the other side of you. Demonstrator, so go around. Zionist. Anti-Semitism, Zionist. See, this is why free speech must be stomped out throughout all of Western civilization. Of course, Fox News was only too happy to pick up this story and further allege baseless claims of anti-Semitism at Yale.
They should be able to move about campus freely, don't you think? No matter what religion you are, not being stopped by mass students, Hamas sympathizers. That's what happened last night. I'm not talking about Columbia last year. I'm talking about Yale last night.
And one more example, let's look what's happening at another Ivy League school, Cornell. This is what just happened there. Cornell is canceling a Kalani concert with the university's president claiming that the singer has espoused anti-Semitic, anti-Israel sentiments in performances, videos, and on social media. So because Kalani is also critical of the Israeli government, and again, they falsely call her anti-Semitic, but what they really mean is simply criticizing Israel. She gets her performance canceled. And look, this is all coming from the same people who spent years and years and years mocking what they called campus snowflakes, people who can't tolerate dissenting points of view, cancel culture. They have taken over. The Zionists and everyone who is on board with this, they have taken over cancel culture 100%. They are the complete owners of it now, as they cancel and silence anybody on college campuses who criticizes Israel.
And those have been your 4 basic food groups. This is a bleak time in the world, and it seems like every day there's something new to worry about. But with so much out of our control, one thing you can regain control of is your family's financial future with life insurance through SelectQuote. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Head to SelectQuote.com and the licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/useful. Go to SelectQuote.com/useful today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/useful.
For this week's interview, we are joined by 2 guests, starting with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He is a retired U.S. Army officer, one of the first people to blow the whistle on the war in Afghanistan. He's now the host of the YouTube show Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And because Daniel Davis has been a consistent critic of warmongering from Afghanistan to Iraq to many other conflicts, he has won himself some powerful enemies. And we received a new reminder of that just very recently when he was nominated for a very senior position at the Office of Director of National Intelligence. He was nominated to be a deputy to the current DNI chief, Tulsi Gabbard. But pro-Israel, pro-war forces launched a smear campaign and sabotaged his nomination. So we'll be talking to Daniel Davis about that today, along with the latest in all the other conflicts that these same pro-war forces that sabotaged him now want to make even worse. And we began by asking Daniel Davis about the latest in the proxy war in Ukraine. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
It's certainly my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
A lot happening in Ukraine this week, so let's start there. What is your assessment of where we're at in the Ukraine proxy war?
Yeah, listen, we need to understand from the first point here that this war is already concluded. Ukraine lost, Russia won. That's the entry point that we have to start with, because there's too many people in the West that seem to still operate. Yeah, hard to believe, though it is, that there's a decision that can be made, that there's a choice that can be made, that Trump can either press for a good outcome or he can, quote, abandon Ukraine and give to a bad outcome. There isn't. There is no good deal here to be had. There is only, we can get an ugly peace deal right now, or we can avoid that yet again and end up setting the stage for a Ukraine military outright defeat. Now, I argue pretty emphatically and a little bit emotionally, as you can see, that this is the consequence of the West writ large, and especially the Biden administration over the first 3 years of this war, abjectly refused any diplomatic attempt to either prevent the war from happening, and there were many opportunities for that, or to take any of the diplomatic off-ramps that were offered all along the way. Every time we rejected this, and you can start with the Minsk agreements in 2015, then the worst conditions that Putin offered in December 2021, but were still relatively good at that point. And then you get to Istanbul in 2022 and so forth, all the way through to June 2024. Every time they offered something, it was rejected by the West. The next time it came up, the terms got worse. Now then, they're far worse than even the June 2024 option from Putin. But if we don't take this one, then I think that the only thing left then is going to be military conquest. I don't think there will be another opportunity. So that's the stage set that we have to understand. So when Trump says he's willing to walk if he doesn't get a deal, he means the ugly deal that Putin is willing to agree to. And if that is rejected, then I think the next stage is going to be a military defeat for Ukraine. So that's how I see it.
You are a very prescient voice when it comes to issues of war and peace. Some people may remember that you were a whistleblower when it came to the war in Afghanistan. It was back in 2012 that you spoke out against it. Can you talk about how hard it is to speak out from within the military about the mistakes that the United States is making and how that applies to today?
Yeah. I mean, it was painful, because I had, just without recounting the whole story, I had believed, I don't know why I did, it seems silly in retrospect, because I believed General Petraeus when he said in 2010, in March 2011, that things were getting better, that we were on the increase, et cetera, and that we're on the path, the right azimuth, as he put it, to end up having success. I had written in 2009 and in 2010 that we were on a track to lose the war if we didn't make major changes. And then I heard Petraeus say that actually it was in 2010 that he said they were making some changes. And I thought, I guess I was wrong then. Okay. Well, I was looking forward to it because I was deployed in late 2010 and through most of 2011 to be able to be a part of it. I thought if they're going to succeed, I would love to be able to see that war wrapped up. But when I got on the ground, I saw that it was all complete lies. And I mean, total lies, not misinformation, not, well, he was just guilty of being optimistic. There were outright lies that they knew these things weren't true, and yet they were saying them anyway. And then when I saw the results on the ground, that men were dying because of it, that Afghan people were dying because of the pursuit of an unattainable military objective, my consciousness got to me, and I couldn't remain silent, even though many advised that I should, because they said, you're not going to change anything. And obviously, no one's going to be happy about that if you call out one of the top 4-star generals as an active duty service member while serving. They're not going to like that, and surely they didn't. But at least as of that time, I retired in 2015, but at least as of that time, as long as you followed the strict rules of engagement and the Army regulations, et cetera, and didn't violate any laws, didn't give away any classified information, et cetera, you still had the ability to be able to say some things. And so I followed meticulously all those rules. So I didn't get thrown in jail. They didn't take any adverse action against me, et cetera. But it was very, very painful and very unpleasant. And of course, they wanted it to be that way so that it's a damping effect on anyone else, so that nobody else in the future takes that action, because they say it'll end your career. And if you don't follow all the details, they can come after you and they will take adverse action, et cetera. And of course, that continues to be the case to this day. But there's always good people that are willing to take the risk because it's the right thing to do. And I admire all those people.
Another question I have based on your biography and political trajectory is that people may remember that it was reported that the Trump administration took back a nomination for you to be the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for mission integration. And Jewish Insider, this kind of rag that likes to write hit pieces, they're very pro-Israel. They take credit for reporting on your views on Israel and basically tanking this job offer. I want to know what your response is to both the Jewish Insider piece and also how you felt about having the job rescinded, if that is what happened.
I don't want to go into too many details just because I don't want to violate any confidence that some people have put in me. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus that doesn't deserve to be there, because I'll tell you, there were people that were fighting hard for me, and I will always value that. But in the end, that did. I actually was going to be the Deputy Director of National Intelligence, but that got sank because there were these voices that, and the Jewish Insider was one of many. Mark Levin was another one that was spreading all kinds of stuff. He forwarded a lot of those comments, et cetera. And listen, aside from me personally,
and the ADL.
Oh, yeah. And there's also another one called JFeed, which actually had a headline that said, "Victory. We got Tulsi Gabbard to drop Davis from the list here." And listen, that's not something to brag about. That's a shame, because what that's telling you is that there is some external entity that has power over who gets to serve in the United States government at even the highest levels. And, and we don't know all the details about what's happened with these three officials that were fired from the Department of Defense, from Hegseth, et cetera, Dan Caldwell and these other two fellas. But it sure looks like that they were not towing the line like they're supposed to on issues like the Iran potential war with Iran, et cetera. And that is a real problem that we need to get to, that needs to be addressed here. Because if we can't even say we're going to genuinely have our own country's priorities and needs set first, and that we have to trim our sails, we have to be afraid of what somebody from another country may say, then something is desperately wrong here. Because as much as I care a great deal about Israel, let me just be point blank on this. I actually love the people of Israel. I also love the people of Palestine. I'll just point out, I care about all of the people there. But when you say, okay, we're going to follow one path here that harms another group of people writ large, not just the Hamas terrorists, but all of the Palestinian people. And then if you don't hold that view, you're going to be prevented from serving in the United States government. Something is desperately wrong, and we need to get that fixed.
Well, let's turn to one of those officials from the Pentagon who was fired under Pete Hegseth, Dan Caldwell. He recently spoke to Tucker Carlson, and in his remarks, it sounds to me like he was blaming a group called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is a pro-Israel think tank that has been pushing regime change in Iran.
That's why people want war with Iran. I think when it comes down to it, is a lot of people still think you can do regime change wars successfully in the Middle East.
Regime change wars? I thought this was all about getting rid of the half dozen Iranian nuclear sites because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, I think Donald Trump has exposed them, because they're essentially, some of the biggest advocates of war with Iran, whether it's groups like Foundation for Defense of Democracy, writers at certain publications. Essentially, they are saying the problem with diplomacy is it doesn't lead to regime change, is that the policy should be regime change. It's almost like the nuclear issue is really about creating a pathway to regime change. And it really still goes back to this idea, is a lot of them deep down inside believe, and some of them say it out loud, that we could have made Iraq successful. And Iraq is just a mess. It is an absolute just cluster.
So that's very powerful, Dan Davis. Dan Caldwell is basically calling out a specific group, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and pointing out that they're pushing regime change. And it's those kinds of forces that are not only trying to get the U.S. involved in another conflict, but are helping to push out officials in the Pentagon who disagree.
Yeah, I've had a lot of issues with freedom of FDD, as they're sometimes called, for a long time. I've actually debated some on some television programs, and I think they have just almost the worst advice that I've ever seen. And the things that they advocate and push for don't work. And nobody ever goes back and calls them on this thing that they have advocated for all these things in the past. And then all of a sudden, now they want to argue these new things here, especially with Iran. And gracious, I mean, if it doesn't take much military expertise to be able to look and say, if you start a war with Iran, number one, you may not win it, because unlike, like, say, Syria or even Iraq, the Iranians have some very potent capabilities, and they can fight back if we go to the wholesale war against them. But then they don't even think about the backside. What if you succeeded? What do you think is going to happen next? That you're going to have usher in some kind of peace? I mean, how did that work out with Iraq when we got rid of Saddam Hussein? We have a very Iran-friendly government that was in there. What happened when we went into Libya and got rid of Gaddafi? There's still a split government to this day. I mean, it's disaster everywhere you go and try it, and it doesn't work anywhere. And we don't have to go much farther to Afghanistan as well. And every time we try something like that, it just turns into disaster. And yet these people are myopic, and they can't see the track record, the hideous track record that has been in the past. They can't see the military fundamentals that exist in plain sight if anyone's willing to look at them. And then they have this imagined outcome that it can improve things, when almost all it will do is get lots of people killed, to include Americans, to include Iranians, to include Israelis. All kinds of people will die to have this fiction that you can improve something, and all they're going to end up doing is worsening it for everybody. It's really egregious.
Speaking of Iran and Israel, the rescinding of your job offer, the policy we're seeing now from Trump, suggests that there really isn't a lot of daylight, as the saying goes, between the two presidents when it comes to Israel-Palestine, and perhaps even among all presidents. I mean, how much room does the Israel lobby leave presidents to have their own policy when it comes to that region?
You know, there's something wrong with even the way the question was framed there. How much freedom do they have for their own policy? What that's even asked is illumination of the real problem here. And really, though, I got to say, it gets down to leadership, and it gets down to, are you a strong leader or not? You could be influenced. You can have a lot of people design things, but if you constantly give in to that, and if you do what they ask and you're afraid to stand up against anything, I'm just going to be saying it straight. That is the implications that you're not a very strong leader, because I want somebody in my country that will listen to people. And like I said, I'm friendly to Israel too. And if there's joint help, if there's things that are mutually beneficial, cool, let's go down that path. But when those interests diverge and all of a sudden you want to go down a path that's harmful to mine, you're on your own. I'm not going to go there with you, and not even going to consider it. So unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be many that have been occupying that top spot that have that attitude, which is, another problem.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I saw you were interviewing Douglas McGregor, and you asked him kind of to explain Trump's policy, and he just said the Israel lobby. And I'm wondering if there's anything that goes in the other direction. There's a big debate, it's like the wag the dog debate. Is it that the Israel lobby controls U.S. foreign policy and forces it to act against its own interest? Is it that there's something that the U.S. gets out of Israel? Like Joe Biden famously said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent her. Is there any way that the United States historically has used Israel for its own self-interest, or does it do so now?
I'm sure that there's some marginal benefit around the edges somewhere. And like I said, there are some areas where we have mutual benefit. We, at least ostensibly, both want freedom and democracy and peace and stability, et cetera. Though that's the definitions change. But I will say, right, yeah, obviously I have a big problem with that. But I will say, though, on the positive side, that unlike the Biden administration, Trump does appear willing to push back sometimes because, he started off just really antagonistic toward Iran and making it sound like in the 1st of March that the decision for war had already been made and we're running out of time and all this. And then now that at least he's willing to say, well, actually, let's see if we can have a negotiated settlement. Because I think at the heart of it, Trump really is an America firster, and he doesn't like war. So at least so far, there's a chance that he's going to be able to push back on that. Now, we'll see how that goes. We'll see if Israel says, all right, you either do this or we're doing it on our own and drag you in, which is, I think, kind of like what they did with the Biden administration, put them in a what they thought was a no-win situation, and then Biden ended up giving into it and helping with our armed forces. I mean, why is the U.S. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the Middle East right now? Why are all of our bombers at Diego Garcia as though it's an extension of the Israeli Air Force? That's a big problem to me. But I'm still hopeful that there is enough because pushback in the other direction. And there are more people in the administration right now who are on the side of doing something that makes sense and it's logical and it's not going after war than there have been in a long time. And I hope that they can continue to hold positive sway.
But if they don't, does that suggest that Trump isn't actually an American firster, or that his being an American firster is secondary to other concerns and pressures?
I mean, that we would have to make that assessment once it happens. But I would say, though, if we go to war with Iran, absent a direct attack by Iran against us, number one, it'll violate the Constitution. It'll violate the 1973 War Powers Act, and it'll violate common sense because there is no reason for us to attack another country that hasn't attacked us and that has been deterred since 1979. There is absolutely no reason. And if we take that unilateral action, then there will be a lot of questions to answer.
And militarily, I mean, what is the case that people who want war with Iran are making? Like, what do they expect will happen if the U.S. strikes Iran? Presumably, they think this will be a grand success. And what might be wrong with their thinking?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
That was a great interview, and I really encourage people to, if they don't already do so, sign up at usefulidiotspodcast.com so you can hear the full interview or see the full interview. And we talk about some really interesting things, including whether or not we've actually had a strong leader as president in recent history, and also Daniel Davis responds to some very interesting comments from none other than Barry Weiss about war with China. Now, we're going to bring you our second interview, which we were very happy to do. It's with Glenn Diesen, professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. He's the author of several books, including his latest, The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order.
Glenn Diesen, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
There's a lot happening in the Ukraine proxy war. Russia has just launched one of its deadliest attacks on Kyiv in a very long time. Meanwhile, you had these talks this week that were supposed to happen in London, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio skipped out, saying that basically Ukraine is not ready to come to the table. And Volodymyr Zelensky is openly rejecting one of the key U.S. concessions so far, which was to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea. So what's your assessment of what we're seeing right now?
Well, I think it was a poor play by Zelensky, though, because, again, this is Trump's 100-day plan to finish off the war. So obviously he has his proposal coming forward. And even as the American media recognized, it had some real concessions from Russia. That is, it's effectively willing to change then the administrative borders of these 4 regions. So in other words, it will give up claims to territory it wouldn't hold. At least this was what's reported in Financial Times. But I guess the problem is if you know that the United States is preparing to walk away and wash its hands with this war if it can't get a peace deal, and you know that the Russians are making real concessions, then obviously you want to at least appeared to accommodate Trump's proposal. But Zelensky shut it down before even the meeting took place. And, he, in the way he did it as well, very publicly, saying that, there's nothing here to discuss. But to be honest, giving up Crimea, I think, would have been the most easiest of the concessions, because it's been in Russian hands now for 11 years. There's no chance of ever getting it back. So it's I think at least it would have been worth to meet in London and discuss these things.
You mentioned that there was a report about Russia agreeing to not try to conquer all of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, these 4 regions that Russia has claimed as its own. That was in the Financial Times. But do you believe that? I mean, that strikes me as a pretty big rollback from Putin to abandon what has been it wasn't initially the aim of the war. He talked about basically trying to get Ukraine to denazify and to respect Russian security concerns. But in the fall of 2022, he did lay claim to these Ukrainian territories. Do you think it's possible that he's now walking that back?
It's possible, but again, it's also possible that this is not correct. So I can't say it for sure. But as you said, originally the war was not about territory, as we know from the Istanbul Agreement in the beginning of 2022. The Russians were willing to make compromise on everything except for the restoring neutrality for Ukraine. So I think that when they annexed these 4 territories, it happened. Obviously, after the Istanbul Agreement had been sabotaged, and also when the Western countries began to pour in a lot of weapons into Ukraine, while at the same time boycotting all diplomacy. So in other words, this became a war of attrition. If Russia considers to be an existential threat, your approach then would be to defeat the adversary. And also one thing they noticed once they started to take territory was you need civilian administration, you need the cooperation with the locals. If they think that you're going to trade them away at the end of the war, it's very hard to get any cooperation from the locals. Seeing it as a war of attrition, which would have to effectively defeat Ukraine, as well as needing the cooperation of locals. I think this was a huge incentive for annexing these territories. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to walk all of this back, but again, getting an end to the war, it would be a huge reward. This is, it's been going on for more than 3 years. They don't want this war anymore. So I do think that they would be prepared to make some great concessions, because there's also some recognition in Moscow that what they're asking for is a pretty tall order. They want, no NATO, no security guarantees. They want territorial concessions. It's also, they don't want Zelensky there anymore. So they're asking for a lot. So I think realistically, if they had to compromise on something to get the peace they want, obviously they can't do on neutrality. They can't give away territories which they consider to have been liberated. I'm using the Russian lingo here, but to change the administrative border, to forego territory they're not yet holding, I think that's plausible. Again, it could be that this is. There were some reports from Moscow suggesting this could be fake news, but again, they have to manage domestic opinion as well.
You actually had the chance to ask Putin a question in person back in November at a speech that he gave at a meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club. At the risk of hopefully this doesn't now get you smeared as a Putinist, but you probably already are, just like Aaron and I already are. So there's nothing to lose there. But there's so much vilification of him. What can you tell us about him as someone who actually has spoken to him?
Well, that's the name of your program, the Useful Idiots.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
it's better to... No, well, this is a common smear, but, one can cite American leaders, because most American leaders have spoken kindly about Putin as well. You can go back, even back to Bill Clinton, who argued that, that he's very pragmatic, he's upfront, he's honest, and when Putin says something, he will follow through. So, but of course, he can't say that anymore, because now we all have to fall into line that, he's deceptive and evil.
The new Hitler.
Yeah, the new Hitler. So, no, so I don't think it's correct. Well, if you've seen the way he's very smart, and what you see when he engages with a big audience, he can speak for hours, and he's also quite polite in this way. Doesn't mean that he's an angel, but this evil image we're building up, I think this is very self-defeating. I think this, you mentioned this new Hitler. This is often we go into these traps. It's a good way of mobilizing the public, in favor of conflict, be it sanction or war, to portray this as a struggle always between good and evil. Walter Lippmann made this point that this is the core of propaganda. It's good versus evil, then you mobilize the public. The problem always, according to Lippmann as well, is you can't make peace anymore. How can you make peace with Hitler? Any negotiation become appeasement, as we always say, and they have to be defeated. So again, weapons are the path to peace, as NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg used to say. So this is why it's very dangerous. So I don't think it's helpful to portray Putin as evil, especially when countless leaders have said the opposite, that this is someone you can work with. And people say, how can we possibly trust him? Look, we invaded Ukraine. But that has nothing to do with trust. He said he would.
Right.
He said he warned for 7 years when the Minsk agreement wasn't implemented. This could lead to war. Again, we said it on our part as well. This was the only peaceful path to end the conflict. In 2021, he argued, we need security guarantees if you're pushing your military infrastructure towards our border. If not, we reserve the right to use military force as the solution. Now, this doesn't mean I'm supporting the military solution. I'm just saying this is what he said, and that's what he did. So I'm not sure where the trust comes in, because he never argued that they wouldn't do this. So
yeah, it's definitely one of the talking points, though, that's used.
Yeah, but it's so dangerous because we end up deluding ourselves. It's the same by calling him a dictator the whole time. I think power is too concentrated in the presidency there, but it's been since the 90s. But when you call him a dictator, it assumes that a peace agreement only depends on the whims of Putin. But he has a whole political class, the Duma. He has a lot of, he can't just dictate anything he wants. But I think it's very dangerous to delude ourselves with all this. Again, when we say dictator, this just means that he's a bad guy, which makes us the good guy. But it's very dangerous, I think, this portraying our opponents in this manner.
I have a lot of friends and family who are liberal, who really think that Putin is, like you were just saying, he's a new Hitler. He's going to take over Europe. He's just starting with Ukraine. And if you care about Ukrainians, you have to support them and give them arms to help them defeat Russia. What is your response to that argument for people whose primary motivation, allegedly, is to help Ukrainians?
Well, I think I would like to see evidence of this. I've never seen any evidence of Russia wanting to conquer any parts of Europe. And indeed, even the worst anti-Russian hawks like Michael McFaul recognized that no one in Moscow was calling for even getting Crimea back until the coup of 2014, or he calls it a democratic revolution. But I think this is also, many people have good intentions, but I think we've fallen into a very common propaganda technique. That is, you come up with a concept which everyone can agree with. That is, Ukraine has been invaded, they're being bombed, a lot of people are suffering, a lot of people have died. Obviously, everyone empathizes and want the best for Ukraine, so you come with this concept. We stand with Ukraine, we want to support them. But this can be a very hollow concept. You can fill it up with any content you want. So, for example, when we toppled the government back in 2014, this didn't have majority support of Ukrainians. So we removed their democratically elected government in an unconstitutional coup against the will of the majority of Ukrainians. The majority didn't even support the protest on Maidan, even less supported the coup. And yet we said this, we stand with the Ukrainians. When supported the military force against Donbass in 2014, we also stood by, Ukraine, even as they were killing thousands of Ukrainians. Keep in mind that in 2019, 73% of Ukrainians voted for Zelensky's peace platform to implement the Minsk agreement. 73%, a landslide election. They wanted an end to the war. In the West, we said, well, this is capitulation to Russia. We're going to stand with Ukraine and help them avoid capitulation. So we're going to ignore this democratic revolution. And again, the purge of the political opposition, the media, the church, language, culture, across the board, it's always about standing with Ukraine. And even now, when the war is lost, and we know that the war is lost, we know that the majority of Ukrainians want negotiations. Yet we say that this is to abandon Ukraine, to betray it. If you stand with Ukraine, you have to keep the war going. You reject all of this peace. You send more weapons, even if they can't win. Even if more men, territory, equipment, infrastructure is lost every day. This is what it means to stand with Ukraine. So again, it's a concept everyone agrees with, but it's filled with something, very dangerous content.
Let's talk about Zelensky more. Trump appears to be blaming him for the current impasse. Although, as we're recording this, he's just criticized Vladimir Putin directly on social media after that Russian strike on Kyiv. Trump wrote, "Vladimir, stop," addressing Putin. But he's directed most of his criticism at Zelensky, who he basically says is holding up any kind of peace agreement. Talk about the position that Zelensky is in right now.
Well, I think he put himself in a difficult position now. I don't think it's an accident that once he rejected this peace offer from Trump, that the Russians obviously launched the biggest strike on Kyiv since the beginning of the war. I mean, this was a very, very big attack. And again, there's a lot of videos, people taking cover down in the metro station. So, it was quite a powerful attack. Now, I think, he put himself in a dangerous position because, the Americans have said that they don't want to stick with this war. They have other priorities as well, and they want to put an end to it. So if the United States pulls out, that means cutting the supply of weapons, intelligence, and other form of assistance. Things can go from bad to worse pretty quickly. So, but Zelensky is in a very difficult spot because it's limits for what he can actually accept as well. This is something that was recently considered to be Russian propaganda, but Boris Johnson recognized, which was in 2019 when he won Zelensky on a peace platform. The nationalists threatened to kill him if he would implement it. So he reversed it completely.
You got to remember that Volodymyr Zelensky is not he's not an unreasonable guy. He got elected really as a peacenik. He was out that, 2019, he tried to do a deal with Putin. As far as I can remember, his basic problem was that the Ukrainian nationalists couldn't accept the compromise, and you can see why not.
So again, this is Boris Johnson recognizing it, and I don't think that has changed that much since. I think the different nationalist and fascist groups have only increased their power in Ukraine. So I think if he tries to, if he would to accept Trump's proposal, he could be lynched the next day by the nationalists. So it's he's in a very difficult spot, and if he doesn't accept it, then of course Ukraine will continue along this collapse, and they are having huge problems now on the battlefield. So I don't know how he can get out of this. It's probably better for him to step down and get someone new in. But a lot of this seems to have been by design originally, because it's worth noting that the US and many of the other NATO countries supported a lot of this nationalist since 2014, because they were seen, much like after World War II, to be loyal anti-communists. Now they're loyal anti-Russians who would effectively be a veto power on any attempts to restore workable relations with the Russians. So no, I think Zelensky is in a very difficult spot at the moment.
That admission from Boris Johnson was so significant and such bad timing for Zelensky, because it came right after Zelensky blew up that White House meeting by claiming that you can't negotiate with Putin. And his example of that was, I reached this deal with him in December 2019, and Putin didn't agree to it. And then you have just, a few weeks later, Boris Johnson admitting in an interview, oh yeah, the reason that deal didn't stick is because Ukrainian nationalists, as he called them, by which he means the Azov Battalion and other extremists, couldn't accept the compromise. So Boris Johnson not only, undercut like a huge piece of propaganda that has sustained the proxy war, which is that, you can't trust Russia. He specifically undercut that propaganda when it came from Zelensky and Zelensky's effort to excuse his blowing up the White House meeting, which put him in a very, very bad position. And after that meeting, The U.S. cut intelligence support to Ukraine briefly, although they've restored it. But what is your sense now of the future of this war? Because it looks like Trump has lost his interest in continuing. And if the U.S. permanently pulls U.S. military intelligence support, I mean, how long can Ukraine fight on?
Well, it's the problem for the United States is this 100-day term or limit that Trump set. It could seen as being very arbitrary, and it could be extended. But the thing is, he keeps making the point: this is not his war. He wants to end it. This is Biden's war. But he is supplying the weapons. He's supplying the intelligence. So the United States is fighting against Russia. They are, and as we learned from this New York Times article a few weeks back, it's mostly been the Americans who have been doing the planning, military planning, selecting targets, providing the weapons, intelligence. So they played a very dominant role. So this is, it's not even a proxy war. We kind of crossed that line already into more and more direct war, especially with this long-range missile. So one have to ask, after 100 days of Trump participating in a war against Russia, at what point does it become his war? It might be too late for him to start to back out of it. So I think there's huge pressure on Trump to either find a political settlement or to begin to pull away from this. But once he pulls out of Ukraine, he will lose a lot of influence over the Europeans as well. And so it's a good way of being able to attempt to dictate the outcome or have at least influence over the negotiation process. But if he doesn't think there can be a negotiated settlement, then he might just, cut his losses and move on. So it's hard to say.
On April 23rd, Trump also took to Truth Social and said to Zelensky, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that, quote, Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here, end quote. This statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama. And it's not even a point of discussion. And then he goes on to ask why they didn't fight for Crimea when it was taken years ago. But it seems like Trump is kind of acting like a teacher who's, chiding two students who are fighting with each other, in the form of Putin and Zelensky. It's kind of a weird question, but if you were Trump or you were president and you were interested in bringing peace to this region, what is it that you would do? Or if you were advising Trump, same thing.
Well, first of all, he has a very strange role because the United States was the main actor provoking this war back in 2014. They were the main actor who pushed for regime change in Ukraine. They're the one who blocked the possibility for a settlement. I think it was John McCain who called the Minsk agreement for Moscow bullshit. I think was the words. So, is the United States a mediator or a participant? I think they're trying to sit on both chairs, so at least pretend as if they're mediator while they're fighting the Russians. Now, it's hard to say what can be done now. If Zelensky really says there's nothing to talk about when the Trump administration have done their best to understand the position of both sides and put forward a proposal. He couldn't even wait until the meeting before he said there's nothing to talk about. I think at some point he needs to put more pressure on the Ukrainians. Now, if he starts to cut supply of weapons, intelligence, this could be a way of pushing this peace forward. But I think he can also put some pressure on the Europeans. Because the Europeans are very much emboldening Zelensky. They're also saying the same thing, by the way. We will never recognize Crimea as Russian. We stand by Ukraine again, and we will send more weapons. This is, again, I don't think this is helping because everyone's recognizing that the war is being lost. But so why are the Europeans opposing this if there's no alternative? And they aren't proposing any alternative. So no, I think Trump needs to have some pressure against all the other three parties. That is Ukraine, Russia, and the Europeans. They're all participants in this war, and the United States, of course. But But there's not that many cards he can play against the Russians at the moment. If he puts too much pressure on Russia in terms of sending more weapons or escalating the war, then it is becoming his war. Then he's just continuing Biden policies. So it's not much pressure he can put on the Russians anymore. And the Russians have most of the cards to play. So if he wants to end the war, he does have to put the pressure on the Europeans and the Ukrainians. And now that sounds cruel, especially for the Ukrainians, but that's... the war has been lost. There has to be a way of putting an end to this. So I think the maximalist position of the Europeans and the Ukrainians is making this very difficult.
And do you see any internal pressure inside Russia on Putin in any direction? I mean, a lot of soldiers, Russian soldiers, who he sent off to fight, are dying. The economy has not collapsed as Joe Biden predicted it would, but it strikes me that it's not doing great. It certainly could do better if there weren't all these sanctions on it. Does Putin face any pressure from within at all? From either side, either from the side that wants an immediate end of the war or from the side that wants him to go even further inside Ukraine and take even more territory?
Well, yeah, it's a difficult war because many has been a bit disappointed by the progress as well. They thought this would be a quick end to the war, and it hasn't been. So many people are unhappy that it drags on, and of course the casualties, the young men coming home in coffins, this is not popular. On the other hand, if you would make huge concessions, such as was suggested in Financial Times, he would also get huge pushback because there's been a lot of sacrifices over the past 3 years, and they don't want another Minsk agreement in which essentially what the Europeans are proposing, that is, let's just freeze the front lines, a long ceasefire, which will give us time to rearm the Ukrainians, and we can fight again in the future. I mean, they do not want this. Now that they see that Ukraine's standing on their last leg, they rather just get this over with. But no, there's some pressure from all sides, I guess. People want an end to the war. They don't want to make too big concessions to end the war. But overall, nonetheless, there's some optimism in the air, though, given that the war is going clearly in Russia's way. But no, this is. I think this war has been terrible for everyone, for Ukrainians, Russians, Europe as well. So it's ironic that the United States is the one who's pushing for ending this the most now, it seems.
Well, we'll see if they can actually get behind their peace proposal, or as Trump has been talking about, simply just walking away and letting the cards fall as they may. Glenn Diesen, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, Aaron.
So we brought you not one great interview, but two great interviews. You're welcome, everyone. You're welcome. That's what we do here. But yeah, both of those voices, very important, interesting perspectives, and not perspectives that you ever hear in legacy media.
That's right. And if you want to see more of these kinds of interviews, please go to usefulidiots.podcast.com to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks so much for watching Useful Idiots. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiots.podcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.